Hello, my name is Amy Reeves. This is my social topic research proposal presentation, Re-examining Milgram, a Social Identity Theory Perspective. In what became arguably the most famous study in social psychology, Stanley Milgram shocked the world when his experiments showed that people are naturally inclined to obey orders from an authority, even while causing another person harm and experiencing extraordinary personal tension. As you can see, 26 of the 40 participants administered the maximum amount of shocks to the learner in the study, going far beyond the limits of danger. Thankfully, the learner was a Confederate and did not actually receive the shocks. Studies like Milgram and others that have replicated and support his findings are important from a social psychology perspective in understanding behavior, but we must ask the question, do people blindly obey authority even when harming another person, or is there another explanation for this behavior? Milgram's blind obedience to authority explanations have been found to be insufficient and inconsistent in explaining behavior within the experiments. By applying the social identity theory to the Milgram paradigm, this study will challenge the obedience model and reinterpret the results according to the principles of social identity theory. There are several elements of the social identity theory relevant to this study. First, in social categorization, people place themselves into categories with which they identify so that they can know more about others and themselves and how they ought to behave. Because of social identification, people adopt behaviors and attitudes of the group they have identified with and conform to the norms of the group. Salience is the degree to which people self-define into a category and identify similarities with their group. Psychological activation of a category occurs when people become cognitively aware of a category or group. These elements are relevant to the proposed study because people place themselves in social categories and then actively identify with these categories. In previous studies, the participant identified with the experimenter and categorized as one wanting to further scientific research. Participants adopted and conformed to the attitudes of the experimenter and acted according to group norms and only disobeyed when they no longer chose to identify with the experimenter. This study will use salience and activation to change the participant's identification from the experimenter to a different category to predict obedience and defiance. Because people assimilate the characteristics and attributes of the group they identify with, behavior and judgments are therefore influenced by the group. Because of this, we can reinterpret the Milgram paradigm and posit that in these studies, participants identified with the experimenter along with his goals and values, and they sought to contribute to science. By utilizing the social identity theory, this study will activate different social groups, and the participant should disengage from identifying with the experimenter and act according to the norms of the activated group. Many situational conditions can affect obedience levels. The immediacy of the victim to the participant influences his obedience. The closer the victim is to the participant, the greater the disobedience. The further removed the authority is from the participant, the easier it is for him to break free of the experiment. The addition of an ally changes obedience levels. When one ally drops out of the experiment, the defiance of the participant increases. Obedience levels drop sharply when a participant is asked to shock someone he knows. And the incremental steps taken to deliver shocks creates a situation where obedience levels are higher. Personality also influences obedience. Obedient participants score higher on measures of authoritarianism, while defiant participants score higher on measures of social responsibility. The traits of conscientiousness and agreeableness are predictive of not only obedient behavior, but a willingness to administer the highest voltage to learners. Gender has been found to have no significant difference on obedience. The role of social identity theory uses self-categorization and social identity to explain obedience, not to authority, but according to group formation. When the participant is categorizing himself with the experimenter and behaves according to the norms related to the scientific endeavor, obedience occurs. Some factors that cause the participant to disassociate from the experimenter are distance, lack of professionalism or prestige, and when the experimenter orders the participant to comply. An interesting BBC prison study found that people do not automatically conform to roles they are placed into. They can be empowered to resist their assigned position rather than accept it. Other studies show levels of obedience are associated with which party the participant identifies with, either the experimenter or the learner. In an engaged followership, the participant follows commands that promote an active identification with the experimenter and desire to contribute to science and result in obedience. Yet at the point where the experimenter's commands resemble an order, the participant disengages from the followership and defies the experimenter. This is opposite of what researchers would expect if participants are merely following orders. Studies have also shown that participants have also defied the experimenter at the point where the learner becomes vocal in his objections. At this point, the participant disassociates with the experimenter and no longer identifies with the scientific endeavor. Because the proposed study has 4 conditions, there are 4 separate hypotheses. The first hypothesis states the salience and activation level of the group motherhood will be negatively correlated with obedience to authority. The greater the degree of saliency within the motherhood group, the sooner the participant will disobey. And when the group motherhood is not activated, no correlation between mother and obedience to authority will occur. The second hypothesis states the salience and activation level of the group religiosity will be negatively correlated with obedience to authority. The greater the degree of salience in religious practice, the sooner the participant will disobey. When the group religiosity is not activated, no correlation will occur. The third hypothesis states the salience and activation of the group patriotism will be negatively correlated with obedience to authority. The greater the degree of patriotism, the sooner the participant will disobey. When the group patriotism is not activated, no correlation will occur. And in the fourth hypothesis, it says the salience and activation of the group science lever will be positively correlated with obedience to authority. The greater the degree of love of science, the longer the participant will obey. When the group science lever is not activated, no correlation will occur. Participants will be recruited from the general public in the DFW area through groups that relate to the 4 conditions set out in the experiment. Prospective participants will be screened for prior knowledge of the Milgram experiments or any well-known replications. An attempt will be made to include a representative sampling of the general population in the 4 experimental conditions. Each condition will be comprised of approximately 30 men and 30 women, ranging in age between 20 and 70, except for the motherhood condition, which will be comprised of 60 women aged 20 to 70 who are currently mothers. In order to help place participants in these conditions, they will be asked where they heard about this study. The dependent variable of this study is the obedience of the participant to the prompts of the experimenter. Obedience is measured by the amount of stress remarks that the participant will make to the learner in this study. The possible values range from 0 to 15. There are 4 independent variables in the proposed study. The first variable is motherhood, and the importance of motherhood and affection towards children is measured by an abbreviated maternal attachment inventory. The results will be coded and a value will be given from 1 to 5, with 1 being not affectionate at all and 5 being very affectionate. The second variable is religiosity and is measured by a brief questionnaire. It asks these 3 questions. How often do you attend religious services? How important is your religion to you? And how often do you study your religion's literature and pray to your deity? It then asks the participant to name the religion they follow, with choices being Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, other religion, and no religion. Results will be coded and added together for a value to represent the degree of religiosity the participant has. The third variable is patriotism and is measured by a simplified patriotism nationalism questionnaire. Values will be given to indicate the participant's degree of patriotism. The fourth variable is that of science lover and will be measured by a brief questionnaire. It asks the question, how interested are you in scientific research? Then the participant will use a Likert scale to indicate the level to which the participant agrees with these 2 statements. I trust the scientific method, and I have faith in the experimenter and his methods. A value will be given indicating the participant's degree of interest in science. Prior to beginning the study, the participant will enter the office waiting room where he meets another participant, or so he thinks. It's really a confederate in the study. Half of the participants in each condition will immediately begin the experiment at this point. The other half of the participants in each condition will have the opportunity to visit with the confederate prior to the experimenter coming out. The appearance of the confederate is dependent upon which condition the participant will be in. For the motherhood condition, the confederate will be a young mother of 3 children who engages the participant in conversation and shows her photos of her children. For the religiosity condition, the confederate will belong to the same religion as the participant and openly discuss his faith. Where applicable, background music identifiable to the religion will be playing. The third condition of patriotism will have a confederate that looks like a service member in uniform. He will talk to the participant about his recent service in Afghanistan and his experience as a member of the military. The fourth condition participant will be met by a fellow science lover and talk about how excited he is to be a part of such an important research study. The goal of this 10 to 15 minute wait and visit time is to activate the participant's identity with a condition group rather than thinking and identifying with the experimenter. After a 10 to 15 minute time of hopeful activation, the experimenter will come out and address the 2 individuals and explain that the current study involves the relationship between stress, resilience, and memory abilities. This proposed study closely resembles both the Milgram and the Bocchiaro and Zimbardo studies in content. The 2 participants will work together in a memory game. The learner will be shown a photograph of 6 objects for 3 seconds, then be expected to choose the correct word group identifying them, an example being a pencil, paperclip, penny, marble, string, and gum. The other participant will be the coach and offer personal feedback. Now the 2 will draw cards, each of which has the word coach on it, ensuring that the participant will be the coach and the confederate will be the learner. Informed consent documents will now be gone over, and it will be explained that there will be a moderate level of stress involved in this experiment, but that either participant can withdraw from the study at any time. The coach and the learner sit at desks approximately 15 minutes across from each other. The coach shows the first photo for 3 seconds and then turns it over, out of view. The learner now turns over a multiple choice format of 4 different written word groups and must choose the correct answer corresponding to the photo. 1 minute elapses between each photo. The coach's role is to provide feedback to the learner. What he finds out is that there are pre-selected remarks, a script so to speak, that he must convincingly follow. The appendix indicates each of these stress remarks along with the responses of the learner. The learner's role is to correctly answer as many memory questions as possible. He will correctly answer questions 1, 3, 6, and 7. His reactions to the stress remarks are already rehearsed and appear authentic, if not a little dramatic. The experimenter's role is to be in an adjacent room, wearing a headset, and in contact with only the coach for procedural questions. The learner has no ability to communicate with the experimenter except through the coach. The coach and the learner can only perform the memory game. No other discussion is tolerated. If at any point during the experiment the coach requests the termination of the study, the experimenter has 4 preset prods. They are, "This has never happened before." The harsh feedback could very well encourage better performance. "If you stop, all we've accomplished will be lost." And "You made a verbal contract to participate fully in this experiment." If the coach then continues the study, this procedure will be repeated again each time he requests to stop. If he continues beyond this and asks to stop the study, the experimenter will state, "You are terminating this study. Is that what you want to do?" If the coach says yes, then the experimenter will come into the room. At this point, he will explain the true study and debrief the participant. The entirety of the experiment should last about 1 hour. This appendix shows the stress remarks of the coach and the learner's responses. As you can see, as each photo memory task progresses, the coach's remarks increase in intensity and become increasingly insulting. While there are numerous studies of situational conditions, personality, and gender in relation to Milgram's paradigm, few examine the possibility of other explanations based on social identity theory. Among these, most studies look at the role of the experimenter and learner as the one the participant identifies with. This proposed study fills a gap in research because it purposely seeks to activate an existing group membership of motherhood, religiosity, patriotism, or that of science lover, the participant, and use these group memberships to predict obedience according to social identity theory. This concludes my social topic research proposal presentation.